Welcome back in, everybody, to Thursday's edition of Birds 365. Joined now by Zach Berman from PHLY. Zach, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you, Zach. You excited? What number is this for you?
I can't wait. This
training.
is year 13 covering the Eagles, year 15 covering the NFL, and I still get the same excitement as year one.
Nice.
I
I
can't
know.
wait for next week.
I call Zach the Brandon Graham of the beat reporters. He sets the temperature for us. He's the thermometer. He's not. What does it say the same?
Be the thermometer, not the thermostat.
There we
Actually,
go.
so that expression I heard from the first time from Mark Sanchez. Mark Sanchez was
Yes.
telling me what it takes to be a quarterback, and he said you have to be the thermometer, you have to be the thermostat, not the thermometer, right? You have to set the temperature as opposed to taking.
And that's what Brandon does for the Eagles. That's what Zach does for us. So it'll be good to see you. I wanted to get you on for two reasons. One, I always love talking Eagles with you, but two, Zach's got a new book coming out in September at the start of the season, The Franchise, the Philadelphia Eagles, a curated history of the Eagles. So go pre-order that on Amazon. I assume they can do that now, Zach. Can they? Is it already up?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's up on Amazon, wherever you get your books. It comes out September 24th, and it's a curated history of the last 25 years of the Eagles. So from the Andy Reid era to present day, 1999 to present
That's the
day.
glory days. Let's be honest. That's
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's a combination of new reporting from my time on the beat, extensive research. It's not an encyclopedia, right? So it doesn't cover everything during that period, but it highlights the players, the coaches, the executives, the moments, right? I think I have some good perspective in there from some of the key people in the organization during that time. And Malcolm Jenkins, I was fortunate enough, Malcolm wrote the foreword to the book. So yeah, that comes out September 24th. And as we get closer, there's really some neat anecdotes and details in there, some of which haven't been out before, that I'm excited to share.
And I am excited to read it. And Zach is now at PHLY, so I should mention that, the PHLY Eagles podcast. We beat you at Aaron Shots this morning, by the way. We had Aaron on, but
is that okay? All right, I gotta listen back and make sure I don't repeat.
But very cool. So I'm looking forward to it. And basically, you're talking about the curated history of the Jeffrey Lurie era, which, as I mentioned, has been the glory days. And that's where I think it all starts this season, Zach, is the fact that, look, that's a difficult decision coming off that collapse for Jeffrey Lurie. From my perspective, and I want to get your perspective, I think he straddled the fence a little bit. And this is going to be the interesting story of how Nick Sirianni handing off an offense that that he was very, whatever adjective you want to use, he liked his offense. Sure. And I think he was proactive. He saw the writing on the wall, and he understood he had to make some changes. But that's a very delicate balance. Where are you on that ship, Zach?
Yeah, it's a good question, and that is one of the key storylines for this season. I think it was a necessary one. I think that for Nick to come back, there needed to be a different voice with the offense, and certainly Kellen Moore brings those types of credentials that he's experienced, he's called plays. There is a change there. Now, to your point, Nick Sirianni, one thing he's told both of us in the past, that there's kind of nothing he enjoys more than putting a game plan together, right? And he's not the one putting that game plan together. So I think there tends to be, and understandably so, a lot of focus on play calling. But the way Nick has often made the distinction to us is essentially the play caller's he's picking the items off the menu, whereas the person putting the game plan together is assembling the menu. And Nick has always assembled the menu. And now it's Kellen Moore doing that. But I do think for Nick to be back this year, there needed to be some type of change. And then the other thing I would add too, and it speaks to Jeffrey Lurie, it speaks to Nick Sirianni, is I think that if things don't go well this year, I don't believe Howie Roseman is the one who's going to be held responsible. I think they feel like this roster is ready-made for success. I don't think Jalen Hurts would be. I think there's an investment there that they want to see it out. I think this is really it's cut and dry. Nick needs to win to be coaching his 5th year with the Eagles.
Yeah. Yeah.
Zach, we haven't had you on all offseason. What do you think of the 2 coordinators they brought in? Obviously, a lot was made about the guys they had last year. It didn't obviously go well down the stretch. They go the experienced route this year. What do you think of the 2 coordinators they brought in for Nick Sirianni's staff?
Yeah, in a vacuum, I obviously like them both. In that Vic Fangio brings considerable experience. He's as John has said often, right? He's the one who, like other D coordinators, try to mimic, and they try to take from that scheme. So now you get the originator of it. But I think one thing in that building in particular, they think a lot's made of like the scheme. They say what I think what they're particularly excited for is the game plans, is the week-to-week game plans that Vic Fangio has, the preparation experience he has with there. And I think with Vic Fangio, really, if you look at the historical context, you're not hiring a top of the league defense. What you're hiring is a high baseline, right? And with the way the Eagles are constructed, I think what their expectation is that the offense is elite and the defense can't be bad, right? So if with Vic Fangio, if you raise that baseline and you combine it with the offense, then you should get what they want. With Kellen Moore, I think what you're getting is someone who first off, the Eagles have been high on him for quite some time. I know they liked him quite a bit in 2021 when they hired Nick Sirianni. They brought him in here. But you have someone who has playing experience, has significant coordinator experience, and has worked with different types of quarterbacks, and has worked in different systems, and is a good play caller. So I like the hires in a vacuum. Now, the reason I say in a vacuum is you have to see how it comes to fruition. And there's a lot of credentialed people in that building. And when you have a lot of credentialed people in the building, it's often everyone kind of wants to have their hands on it. So I am curious to see what it looks like in the end. When you hear the term collaboration, I think it's good in practice. I think it's good in theory, but in practice, someone's finger is always on the button.
Yeah. What did you make of Jalen Hurts at the end of the spring? And I think it was overhyped, but I think he could have handled it better when he was asked about Nick Sirianni. I think it was a layup and he missed a layup, basically. But I will say I sensed a little bit of frustration. If you go back in Jalen's career to Alabama, it started with Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian year 1. It's been constant change year in and year out, except for a year and a half with Shane Steichen. And that happened to be his best year, the second time, when you had a little bit of continuity. You heard the 95% number. I think that's more about terminology than the actual offense. Did you sense frustration? I sense frustration, a little bit of frustration with the constant change that Jalen's had to endure.
That's an interesting point. I don't know if it's from that. I don't know if it's not. I agree with you that he missed a layup. I don't think it had as much to do with Sirianni though as it did with like the media. I think that and you know this well. I think Jalen's instinct is like not to go along with your storyline, not to go along with your narrative, and sometimes he does that in such a way that it becomes like counterproductive publicly. And I think in that situation, it was counterproductive publicly because he took an easy question on the last day. It could be a throwaway answer. He could get on with the summer. The team could get on with the summer, and it turned into something else. Now, the one thing I will say with Jalen, and I'm not afraid to say this, is that there is a pattern here of times when he hasn't necessarily had his coach's back publicly. You think back to the Seattle game last year. You think back to the playoff game last year, right? Now, again, this could be Jalen's impulse. Like, I don't need to help the media out. Like, he kind of has his way of doing things. But I do know there was a sentiment after that Seattle game last year, kind of behind the scenes, that Jalen could have done what AJ did. Jalen could have said, "No, that was on me. I threw the interception. Like that's not on the coach. That wasn't the play call there. There was
Zach, I bring that up all the time because I'm like, the old adage in this league, for quarterbacks and coaches, if there's success, it's we, If there's failure, it's me. You got to step up and take responsibility, as AJ did.
Exactly.
And AJ said, Nick, looked like a fool for us.
Yeah.
Basically was his term. And Jalen to this day has never. So I'm with you 100% on that one.
And then the Tampa game, even if he did not know that this idea that Nick Sirianni was kind of coaching for his job or that could be on the hot seat, like the easy answer there is, yeah, I want my coach back, right? Like Nick should be the coach. He's so my point is, and I do think this is kind of how, like I said, Jalen's conditioned with the media, the rat poison component of it. But look, you can't control the questions, you can't control the answers. And when you're in that setting, you can have your coaches back, you can have your teams back. And I think that there's so I don't think that it was a rift or something of that nature. But I do think Jalen should be cognizant that when he's up there, he's the face of the franchise, and what you say matters.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, Zach, I think Jalen is intentional enough to know those things. I mean, you bring up the rat poison. You don't want to dismiss one set of rat poison to create a whole nother set of rat poison. And in a way, he did that. And part of me thinks he knew what he was doing. Maybe not, but let's talk about Jalen.
I call it an unforced error. That's what I called it. It was easy. It said, he's doing a great job.
Yeah.
That's it. Boom. That it could be as simple as that. It was an unforced error. And it's not surprising that members of the Eagles organization were disappointed because, as you pointed, Zach, it was about the timing.
Yeah.
Everybody's gone. So you got this 6-7 week vacuum of speculation.
Yeah, and this story is about to come back up when you guys talk to him next week in the media, and he's going to be asked about it. Obviously, let's be real. And he'll either quiet it or he will create more storylines out of it. Zach, let's talk about Jalen on the field. A lot was made of his, I guess you could call it a regression last year. Obviously, didn't play the MVP form. They sputtered down the stretch and went 1-6. You think Kellen Moore's the right guy to get Jalen Hurts back to form this year in 2024?
I think Jalen Hurts is the right guy to get Jalen Hurts back to form. I think Jalen is an outstanding quarterback. We have seen that before. I think if last year's the regression, if last year is the down year, that's a fine down year. I think Jalen can play better. I think Jalen will play better. But on the list of concerns that I would have about the Eagles, I don't think Jalen Hurts is like especially high on that list. And it is, I agree with you, Xander. It's incumbent upon Kellen Moore to maximize Jalen Hurts, but I don't think it takes much to maximize Jalen Hurts because I think Jalen Hurts has the tools there. He has the personnel around him. And as long as he's healthy, I'm expecting Jalen Hurts to have a good season.
In a lot of ways, Zach, I always say, for all the talk about how bad the Eagles offense, was, and everybody was bad late in the season. I think if you regress to the mean from a turnover standpoint, it's the same offense, basically.
Yeah, you're right. I think the turnovers, the regress to the mean component there, you're absolutely right. I think they were exceptional at limiting turnovers 2 years ago. Yeah, 2 years ago. And then last year you saw more turnovers. And I don't mean to keep bringing up 2017. But like in 2017, for instance, they were exceptional on third downs and in the red zone. And then when there's a slight regression on third downs and in the red zone, it changes so much with the offense. So if Jalen can find, if Jalen's turnovers can be somewhere between where they were in 2022 and where they were in 2023, it makes a significant difference in terms of points per game and in terms of wins and losses.
Where are you in the, I constantly hear Jalen's got to be under center more, or Jalen's got to get the ball out of his hands more. He's got to dump it off to the backs more. He's got to get the backs involved. And I'm kind of the sentiment that's not him as a quarterback. Like I don't want to turn him into something he's not. What I did see, I think the most alarming statistic with Jalen Hurts is his time to throw was, Justin Fields like last year. In 2022 is about middle of the road. So that he's never going to be top 5. He's never going to be Brock Purdy. He's never going to be the point guard, nor do you want him to be. But you need him to get back to that 2022 level. Is that about just being uncomfortable? Is that about teaching? Is that on Jalen? Because I think if you mandate it, and you heard that number, what was Doug? Doug Nussmeier gave us, I think it was
2.3.
2.3 seconds.
Yeah.
Like he's not getting to 2.3 seconds, nor should he. But when you hear that, are you at least a little bit concerned that they're going to try to, get the fix from a statistical standpoint instead of an organic standpoint? So, in other words, I think Jalen has to learn that on his own versus being, you got to get the ball out in 2.4 seconds.
Yeah, I think what Jalen sees on a play-by-play basis, on a drive-by-drive basis, is critical here. I think back to the beginning of last year. There was a stretch where the one thing you kept hearing was unscouted looks, right? And I think that this is all part of playing a quarterback. It's all part of playing quarterback. You're going to get unscouted looks. I think when I look at the end of the year with the way the Eagles handled the blitz, I don't think Jason Kelce in year 13 didn't know how to pick up a blitz, right? So I think that,
or they don't have hot routes, Zach.
Exactly.
That drove me insane.
I think a lot of it goes back to the quarterback there, and that's. I don't mean that as a form of criticism. Like this is the reality of playing the position, is that when you're exceptional, okay, it looks exceptional. And when you're not exceptional, it looks problematic. So Jalen needs to, I think what he sees on a play-by-play basis and a drive-by-drive basis is critical here. And he's a smart guy who's seen a lot of football. I keep thinking back to the Doug Peterson expression and Frank Reich, that you build that database, right? So now you're in year 3 as the starting quarterback, or I'm sorry, year 4 as the starting quarterback. Yeah. You've seen the counter punches a few times. What's your counter punch to their counter punch? And I think that's gonna be a big part this year.
Zach, a lot's been made of the defense, moving off of Jalen Hurts now, going into the defensive side of the football. Not as talented or deep of a roster on defense. A lot of young talent, a lot of potential, I think, on defense coming into the year. But what do you, when you view the defense, what's the biggest concern for you coming into the year?
Yeah, the biggest concern I would say is they need to have a consistent pass rush, and they traded away their best pass rusher. And Bryce Huff is a good player, or he has upside. Had a double-digit sack season last year, but Bryce Huff doesn't come. He doesn't give me the same comfort level that Hassan Reddick did, right? Fletcher Cox was a consistent player for them last year. They let Fletcher Cox go. I'm sorry. Fletcher Cox retired rather, and now you have Jalen Carter stepping in, and I think Jalen Carter can be a top of the league player. He needs to do it on a consistent basis. Nolan Smith needs to play like a first-round pick, right? I think that it all starts. It sounds simplistic, but you protect the quarterback on offense, you pressure the quarterback on defense, good things happen, right? Yeah. And they need to pressure the quarterback on defense. That's going to be the key. For all the attention that we might pay to linebackers or safeties, it starts with a consistent pass rush. And I think that's a question going into the year is, are you going to get a consistent pass rush?
Yeah. And I'm really high on Bryce Huff. I mean, his pressure percentages are outrageous. Top of the league last 2 years, not even just 1 year. But he's got to prove he can do it and be a full-time player. With the Jets, Zach, he was just a one-trick pony. Now he's going to be asked to, you got to support the run, you got to be a flat defender, and you got to rush the passer. But I am very high on him. You've heard Howie throw out hope is not a strategy a couple times over the years. Well, and a cynic might say it is a linebacker. You're just crossing your fingers. You just pointed out, and I'm with you. It should be a devalued position. It's not as important as the things you've stated. But if the Eagles taking it too far at linebacker, I mean, I see a lot of cross fingers with Devin White and Zach Bond and N'Kobe Dean's health to the point where I'm starting to think, hey, maybe Ben Sumrin can turn into something because he's a great athlete. Have the Eagles taken it too far at linebacker?
I don't think so. And I actually think they're better positioned going into camp this year than they were a year ago. Now you're right. There are question marks. Devin White has been a high level player in his career. He was not a high level player last year. That's why Tampa let him go. The Eagles made as significant of a financial investment in him as they've made since Nigel Bradham. Now that's not saying much, right? They haven't invested in this position, but I think there is a degree of optimism in Devin White, and they were never going to get into the Patrick Queen market or even like the Jordan Brooks market when you look at the at what it took to get those guys. With N'Kobe Dean, that there was significant draft pick investment there, right? A third round pick. He was their highest drafted linebacker since Michael Kendricks, and I think last year what they did is they cleared the deck, okay, for N'Kobe Dean to be the top guy. When N'Kobe Dean went down week 1 against the Patriots, that affected them quite a bit. I think they have a little more depth there. Oren Burks was a top backup last year for San Francisco, who has outstanding linebackers. Oren Burks played in the Super Bowl, right? If Oren Burks is your backup linebacker, that's a fine situation. I would say. We'll continue to see what happens with Jeremiah Trotter, like Ben Van Sumerin's development. But I think if your top 3 is Devin White, N'Kobe Dean, and Oren Burks, that would give me a little bit more comfort than what they had a year ago going into it. But it's not San Francisco's linebackers, it's not Pittsburgh's linebackers, it's not Baltimore's linebackers, and but that's not the way the Eagles are constructed either. I don't think they've taken it too far to answer your question. I just think that they're relying on bets, and you need one of your bets to hit.
With Devin, sorry, Sander, just a quick follow up. With Devin, if it is Devin and N'Kobe, who's the Mike there? Who do you think the Mike is going to be? Who's the green dot?
Yeah, based on my understanding from the spring, it will be Devin White. That Devin White's going to be staying on the field, right? Now, N'Kobe Dean is a part of what you love or what you like about him is like the personality, the leadership component of it. But I do think going into the year, my understanding is that Devin White is going to be the dime linebacker. Devin White's going to be the 3-down backer.
Let's go cornerback, Zach. Me and Johnny Mac talked about it a little bit earlier in the show today. 14 deep they are. Now, they're not going to keep everybody, but
15, depending how you do it.
15, right? I mean, it's a deep position right now. How do you view it coming into the year? They got a lot of young guys, a lot of unproven, but a lot of guys that have a high upside. Yeah. How do you view the cornerback position panning out when September 6th gets here?
Yeah, it's interesting that it's like the opposite of wide receiver, where like wide receiver, you're top heavy, the envy of the league with your starters, but you have questions about your depth. At corner, the Eagles have more depth going into training camp than any time I've covered the team, in these 13 years. They are, there were times last year going into camp where you said, well, if Slay goes down or Bradbury goes down, who's stepping in? This year, I think you'd be comfortable with your second team corners as starters. And they've obviously invested in the position. How I see it shaking out come September is I think the versatility of some of these guys is going to be important in the roster math. I think they can go lighter at safety because you can you can play Cooper DeJean at safety. You can play Avonte Maddox at safety, right, if Maddox is on the team. I think the key is going to be who starts opposite Slay. If they had their way, I think it's going to be Quinyon Mitchell. I'm expecting it to be Quinyon Mitchell. The thing is if Quinyon Mitchell's not the starter, I think it's because Keely Ringo looked outstanding during training camp. And I think there is reason to be optimistic about Keely Ringo. I know Isaiah Rodgers has become kind of like a fan sensation here. I think Rodgers has upside. I don't think it'd be good for the organization if Rodgers is your starter week 1, because that likely means Quinyon Mitchell or Keely Ringo didn't show you enough to start.
Yeah. And I mentioned that earlier in the show, Zach, and make sure you follow Zach on X, Twitter @ZBerm. You can read them at all PHLY.com. I'll listen to them there every day with Bo Wolf as well. Their PHLY Eagles podcast. And the book is coming out in September. So we'll get to that again before you leave. But I'm with you. I go back to Jim Schwartz. And Jim, I love that term he coined, startup costs. Get them over with. You drafted Quinyon Mitchell for a reason. You remember a couple of years ago, Kansas City did it with Steve Spagnuolo. They had all those young corners. They didn't look great early in the season, but by the time they had to make a run, all of a sudden they look better and better. I'm with you. You got to get Quinyon on the field, throw him into the deep end of the pool. Cooper DeJean as well. And maybe by the second half of the season, Zach, you really start cooking with gas. I think that's the way they got to go about it.
Yeah, and to your point there, I think that's one thing that Howie's really pushing for there. I think Howie thought they could have played some of their younger guys more last year. He suggested that at the combine, right? That him and Nick talked about it. Like, Nolan Smith, when they cut Derek Barnett, I think their hope was that Nolan Smith would take on a bigger role. Now, you could say that Nolan Smith's got to earn it, right? But there were times last year, for instance, when they were playing Justin Evans at safety, when you could have had Sidney Brown out there. We can go on down the list for different spots they could do, even on offense. There were times when Sua Opeta was in there when it could have been Tyler Steen. It's the coach's job to think to think, how do you win the next game? And that's why you pay the coaches. But there is this idea that you got to take your lumps with some of these young guys because the payoff is going to be higher, and you wanted that payoff to come in January and February.
Yeah. Last one for me, Zach, on the football side of things. How good can this team be this year? Do you view them as a Super Bowl contender coming into the year?
They need to be a Super Bowl contender with the way they're constructed, with the investments that they've made financially, with kind of what this window is. You look at the Vegas over/under; they're top 10 in Super Bowl odds too. This is a team that if they're not playing in one of the last 3-4 weekends of the year, it'll be a disappointment. And I think it's going to be a disappointment to Jeffrey Lurie. His quote when he spoke in March was, all the ingredients are there. And I think that's the way they view it. You don't sign Saquon Barkley to $13+ million a year if you don't think this team can win right away. You don't make some of the investments that they've made if you don't think this team can win right away. So yeah, they make some moves for down the line thinking, but they absolutely think their window is now, and it should be now.
Yep. And it's exciting time, as it always is, when you have a potential contender. Training camp set to begin next week. Follow Zach's coverage at PHLY, as we mentioned. And the book, September 24th is the day. So be on the lookout. Amazon.com, your favorite bookstore, the franchise, the Philadelphia Eagles, a curated history of the Eagles pretty much through the Jeffrey Lurie era. And Zach has been there for most of it. Nobody knows more about this team than him. Malcolm Jenkins with the forward. Anything else I missed, Zach?
No, that's a great plug. I need you as a spokesperson. I will. I'm having a bunch of book signings around the Philly area.
There we go.
I'm at every game. So if you get a copy, I'm happy to put my name on it. And then as we get closer, there's some details from the book that I'm excited to share.
Zach, I want to ask you one question about the book before I let you out of here. For anybody who doesn't know, Zach also wrote Underdogs, the Philadelphia Eagles' emotional road to Super Bowl victory, all about the Eagles Super Bowl. That book was tremendous. So I'm very excited to read your next book. Can you give us one tidbit, Zach, of what was your favorite thing to write about in this new book that you have coming out, whether it was a topic, a certain year, a certain moment? Give us some anticipation, some excitement for what we might read about that we'll enjoy.
Yeah, I appreciate that. My favorite part was really broadening the lens on the Jeffrey Lurie era. So much of my coverage of Jeffrey is like with a narrow lens to what that season is, or to a particular decision, or even like you go into a Super Bowl, the critical factors that led to the Super Bowl. And I spent a lot of time, or a decent amount of time talking to Jeffrey and broadening that lens to try to get a sense of like what are the critical factors when you look at these 25 years. What established the foundation for this? What were the big decisions along the way? And I think that it was really constructive of me, not just in writing this book, but in covering the team, because it really gave me an understanding of some of the big picture thinking that went into a lot of the things we like there are decisions that they make today that have that you can trace back the stuff they did under Andy Reid and some of the things they did in the mid 2000s. And speaking to Joe Banner for this too, you see a lot of different things, like when you talk about their cap strategy, things they were doing back then and why they were doing it that go into effect here. So I think being able to broaden that lens was the best part of this book.
Yeah, Joe doesn't get enough credit for the cap stuff, and you can just ask him that, Zach.
He will in this book, I promise you that. So,
but he deserves it.
Yeah.
Zach Berman, the great Zach Berman. The book, September 24th. You'll be sick of me soon enough, Zach, but I'm looking forward to seeing you next week as we gear up for another season.
I can't wait. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Thanks, Zach. There's Zach Berman joining us on Birds 365. Great stuff from Zach. We'll be following his work all through the offseason and into the NFL season. Good stuff from Zach Berman. John, I like his perspective. He is I will say about Zach, he's a pretty optimistic guy for a beat reporter.
Oh yeah, he's hot. He's Mr. Energy. He's Mr. Positivity. Yeah. So no question about it. I mean, one of the things in the book I can tell you is he's got Jeffrey Lurie's original sort of checklist to build in a successful team and organization. So a lot of interesting stuff in there.
Yeah, as I mentioned, his first book was tremendous too. The Underdogs book about the Eagles Super Bowl run.
And I would say most of what the Eagles do is trace back to Andy Reid and Joe Banner, to be honest, to be fair. Most of what they do was built by those two guys.